In this video, we're going to learn how to do validations in Angular and ASP.NET Core. The idea is the following. We have a form that we have been building so far in our application, but we now want to add validation to it, and we're going to do validations in two ways. We're going to validate in the server, and we're also going to validate in the front end, in the Angular application. If you want to learn more about building applications with Angular and ASP.NET Core, buy my Udemy course today. Link with the discount to this course in the description of this video. Alright, so let's get to the tutorial. So as I was saying, what we want to do in this video is that we want to use validation. So let's come here to create a new laptop. We have this form here, and without adding a name, I will say save changes, and we're going to see that now we have a laptop without a name, which is not good. So what we're going to do is that we're going to add validations both in the Angular part and also in the ASP.NET Core part. So let's come here. First, I want to come here because in a previous video, we added this task delay here. I want to remove it because we don't need it anymore. So let me remove it from these two places. So now, let's get to the validation part. First, we're going to do validation in ASP.NET Core. For that, we have several options. One of them is using validation in the model. For example, let's come here to laptop F12. Let's come to the model or entity. And in here, I can say required, and with this required, we're saying that this property is indeed required and therefore it cannot be null. Now, you can see that we have a required here, but that is for C#. That means that I cannot create a laptop object without a name. On the other hand, this required that we have here actually integrates with the ASP.NET Core validation system. So that is what we have to do. Now let's come here to laptop controller, because I want to have that validation being applied automatically. And for that, we have to make sure that we have this API controller here. Now with this, I can press Ctrl+KS to save everything. And let's come here. And I want to come here. And let's see that if I press Save Changes one more time, we are not going to get anything. But as you can see, nothing happens. And nothing happens because if we press F12, we're going to see that we have here. Let me come to the console, and here we have a 400. This 400 means that we got back an error from the web API. Now, I need to be able to display that error into my Angular application. And then after that, we're going to do this validation from the Angular part. But let's go step by step. So let me close this, and let's come here. And actually, I want to come to Postman so that we can see that shape of the response. So let me click on Send. And we're going to see that we have again a 400 by request, and here we have errors and then name and then an array, because we could have several errors for the name property. And this is what we want to parse in our Angular application so that we can display this error to the user. So let's do that. Let's come here. I want to come here to my Angular application so that we can create a function that will allow us to parse that error message. So let's come here, app, shared. Here in shared, I want to create a new folder. So folder, functions, right click on functions, new file, parse errors, ts, and then in here I will do the following. I will say function, we should export this, export function, parse error from web API, and here we're going to receive an object of type any, and we're going to return an array of strings because there could be several errors. So let me say here, const error equal to object error errors. This errors property that we have here refers to this errors property that we have here. The thing is that all of this gets put in a property called error. So that is why you have to say here errors.errors. Alright, so after this, I will say let error messages of type string array, empty array. In the end, we're going to return this. So in here, we're going to populate this array. I will say for let field in error, and I'll say const messages with fields equal to, and I will do a mapping. So I will say error field dot map message of type string, and I want to do the following. I want to say here backtick field colon and then message. So what I'm doing here is that remember please that here we have an object inside of errors. We have an object. For example, here we have this name property, and every property has an array of errors, and therefore what I'm doing is that I am mapping this into an array of error messages, so that it says name column error message 1, then name column error message 2, and so on. So let's come back here, and that is what I'm doing here, and now I can say error messages equal to error messages concat. I want to concat these messages with fields. And that's it. With this, we're parsing the error messages. Now I want to use this from my component that creates a laptop. So let me come here to create product or product create here. I want to put those errors here in a property errors, a string array equal to an empty array. And then in here we have the subscribe, through which, as we said before, we are sending an HTTP request to the server. Now, here I am assuming that I won't have any errors, but that is not realistic, and therefore what I will do is that I will use an overload of the subscribe function so that I can pass an object, and here I will say next. The next property indicates that if the response is successful, so if the HTTP request to the server was successful, so for example, if we indeed did create a laptop, then run this, and here I will say this. I will navigate to product, to the list of products. Now, comma, error. If there was an error, for example, a 400 bar request, then I want to say error object, and in here I will do my parsing. So let me say const errors equal to parse error from web API, and let me pass the error object. And then I will say these errors equal to errors. Alright, now here we have the list of errors, so I want to display it. For that, I will create a new component. So let me open the terminal, and here I will say ng generate component shared components display errors. Alright, so let me open this, and this. Alright, so first let's come to the class of the component. I want to put here an input, so let me say here input. Let me import this input, and let me say require true, because this is a required property, and let me say here errors a string array. I use this bang sign here because I know that this will always be populated because this is required, and therefore I can rely on this to not be undefined or null. So with this, we can go to the HTML, and let me say here on our list, and I will say here for, and I will say here errors, and then in here I will say list item error. Alright, and finally I want to come to the CSS because I want to say on our list color red. Alright, so finally let me come to product create HTML so that we can put here our display errors component, and let me say here errors equal to errors. Alright, so Ctrl K S to save everything, and let's come here. Let's wait for the application to be refreshed. Now let's click on save changes, and let's see that now we have name. The name field is required. Excellent, that comes from the web API. Now, of course, in the future, when we do this validation using Angular, this error message will appear here, but this is like the fallback that we're going to use in case that we have errors returned by the server and we want to display them to the user. So another thing that I want to be able to validate is that I don't want to have two laptops with the same name. So let's do that. Let's come here, let's come back to Visual Studio, and here in the post method, I want to do the following. I want to say here, var already exists laptop with name. If there is a laptop with that name, I want to have a true value here so that we can say if this is true, then we're going to return an error. So let me say here, await, I have to go to the database, and therefore I will use context laptops table. I will use the any async function that will allow me to return true or false if there is a record that has the following property, and that property is that the name is equal to the name of the laptop that the user wants to create. So let me say here x.name equal to laptop.name. So if there is a laptop in the database that has this name, this will be equal to true. And if this is indeed equal to true, if already exists laptop with name, therefore we're going to return an error. Let me say here var error message equal to, I will use a string interpolation here. There's already a laptop with name, and let me put here laptop name. Alright, semicolon. Model state, I will use the model state to set the error, add model error, name of, I will use the name of functionality, laptop name, because that error belongs to the name property, and then the error message, which is the error message that we just created. And then we say return validation problem, and we're going to pass the model state. That will allow us to return an error that has this same format. Alright, so let's come here. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned you this before, but this format that we have here is called problem details. Alright, so let's come back here. And let's see that now I need to be able to return many kind of raw results. And therefore I will say action result that will deal with this error. So now let me say Control S to save. Now let's come here and let's make a test. Let me come back here. I want to see that since like the application is down, so let me just come back here, Control F5. Let's come back here. Let me refresh. I want to refresh here. Alright, let me close this. And let's see that this is indeed working. So now I want to copy this, for example, create. Let's paste this here, save changes, and let's see that we have, there's already a laptop with name MSI, so on and so forth. Excellent. So now, I want to do the following before I continue. Let me delete this laptop. And of course, we need to make sure that our application is still working, and therefore I will say new laptop, for example, save changes. We need to make sure that we haven't break anything, and that is indeed the case. Now, as I mentioned before, it is kind of awkward to have this error here. I want to have it here at the name field. And for that, we're going to use validation in the front end. It is very important to have validation both on the back end and on the front end. On the back end, because anybody can bypass the front end validations. And it is important that you have it on the front end so that users have a better user experience. So let's do that. Let me come here. Let's come back to Angular. And I want to come to my component that has the form. So let me say here, products form to the TS. And in here, remember that we're using reactive forms. And in reactive forms, we configure the validations like this. We have this form builder and we have this name property. And in here, this is the default value of the field. And in here, I can use the validations. Let me say here, validators, an array of validators, because this field could have many validations. So let me say here, validators required. Alright, so now this field will be required. Now, I need to be able to display the error message. So first I need the error message, and therefore I will create a function that's called get error messages of name, of the name field. Alright, so here what I will do is that I will get a reference of the name field, not the value of the name field, but the name field itself. So let me say here, const field equal to this form controls name. If field has error required, so we're testing if the field has this error. This means that in this case that if the field is empty, therefore we're going to return the error message. So we're going to say the name field is required. Alright, and in the end I can say return nothing. So now let me use this function here in the UI. So let's come to products form HTML, and let me come here, and below the math input I will say math error, and let me use an expression, and in here I will execute my function. So also something that I want to do is that I want to dynamically disable this button in the case that this form is invalid, and therefore I will say disabled equal to form invalid, and therefore If this is true, if it is true that the form is invalid, then we're going to disable this button so that the user cannot submit the form without having the form being completely valid. So let's see what we got. Control K S, and let's come back here. Let me wait. Alright, so now as you can see from the get-go, we have the Save Changes button being disabled. This is great. Now if I click on here and I click outside of it, we're going to see that we have the name field is required. Now as you can see, we have the error message here alongside a control. Now if I write something like this is a new laptop, then two things. One, the error message disappears, and second, the button is enabled one more time. If I remove this text from here, you are going to see that now the error message appears one more time, and also the button is disabled. So let me put this here, save changes, and see that this works. Now finally, something that we must do, that we must not forget, is that we said that we only want to have laptops with unique names. So what I want to do is that I don't want to allow myself or anybody to update a laptop with the name of another laptop. For example, let me copy this, new laptop, right? Edit this, paste, save changes. Oh, and now we have two laptops with the same name. So we have to do the validation that we did in creation, but also in update. So let's come here to this pod method, and let's do the following. After I check that the laptop exists, I want to say var already exists laptop with name equal to await context laptops any. And notice something. Notice that here I am updating an already existing laptop, right? And therefore that laptop has the same name as itself, and therefore I need to make sure that there is no other laptop with the same name. Let's do that. Let's see here that I can say x.name equal to laptop name, and let me put this in another line so that you can visualize everything better, and x.id is different than this ID that I have here. So again, why did we have to do this? Because remember that since we're updating a laptop, we need to make sure that there is not another laptop with the same name. If we're updating a laptop and we leave the name as it is, then there should be no problem with that. Alright, so that is why I have to make sure that I am checking for another laptop with that name. Alright, so with this we can come here and I can just reuse this code from here. And let me say if already exists laptop with name, then we're going to return our error. So let me press Ctrl F5 to run our application. Let's come here and let's come here and let's see that now. Let me delete this. Alright, so this was successful. And now let me try to copy this and update this laptop to this name. Alright, so edit, paste this here, save changes. And as you can see, we're not getting anything because we're getting back an error from the web server. Now, what we must do is that we have to come here to the products edit component to use our component, to use our display errors component. So let's come to the products edit component TS. Let's come here and let me say here errors string array equal to an empty array. And again, we're going to come here. We're going to use this overload that allows me to pass an next property and also an error property, and in here I will say error and then const errors parse errors from web API error these errors equal to errors, and then let me put my component in the products edit HTML, and in here I will say app display errors and then errors equal to errors. Alright, so Ctrl K S. Now let's do our test one more time. Let's see that if I come here, cancel, let me copy this. I just want to copy this, edit, paste this here, save changes, and let's see that we have that this laptop already exists. Alright, so as you can see, we learned how to do validation in both the back end and the front end. If you want to learn more about building applications with Angular and ASP.NET Core, buy my Udemy course today. There is a link with a discount to this course in the description of this video. Thank you.